notably in the spheres of socio-economy, collective organization, and education, and speaks to broader frameworks of utopian and prefigurative practice, social economy and cultural development, integral yoga and education, community and intentional community. She is a member and resident of Auroville.
Well, a hand to everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm so glad that this event has come together. I'm really delighted to be here at CIIS in a year that marks the 50th anniversary of both this university and Auroville, which is an experimental community in India where I was born and raised, and as Devashish said, is very much the focus of my doctoral research and my life as an ongoing resident of the community. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about Auroville as a site of revolutionary utopianism. I was asked to speak about Auroville in the context of Utopia. And I'm going to do that, but I'm also going to explore, as I do that, each of the overarching themes of this conference, which are counterculture, revolution, pedagogy, and Utopia. So 1968 is an iconic year that marks a powerful era of radically progressive social transformation throughout Europe and North America, in which young people insisted another world is possible. We all know this slogan. And sought to claim and enact it. So the spirit and culture of this revolution were in part informed by the concurrent popular discovery of the Indian yoga tradition, forever immortalized in the Beatles song that I played just earlier while we were milling in. And this yoga tradition offered tools for the individual emancipation that was seen as necessary to accompany and realize the transformation sought for society at large. In the years leading up to '68, in India, two spiritual activists, as I call them, Suryamayi and another, had begun work of revolutionizing the yoga tradition. Rather than individual enlightenment achieved through ascetic withdrawal, integral yoga anticipated and worked towards the spiritualization of all aspects of society, economics, governance, art, education, by summoning an evolution of consciousness. Auroville was founded in 1968 by the mother as an experimental township dedicated to this endeavor, which drew many young people radicalized by the revolutionary period of '68, seeking for new ways of living. As many of you here know tonight, CIIS was founded the same year by a follower of Aurobindo. So creating communities in which to pioneer alternative ways of living than in dominant cultures and societies is, as Aurobindo pointed out, nothing new. When I speak to people about my work, few know what an intentional community is, but actually they've been a recurrent phenomenon throughout human history. Both Buddhism and Christianity have a monastic tradition, and India has a long history of ashrams. While these did not seek to experiment and model new societies, many of them did construe alternative socioeconomic and political units and shifted the basis of human relations. In the 19th century is when we see the first wave of utopian intentional communities, one that did seek to create models of ideal societies. Many of these were based on blueprints designed by utopian social theorists of the time. The communities were prescribed and governed by technocratic leadership, leaving no room for individual or collective agency and for freedom of experimentation. The second wave of intentional communities, starting in the early 1960s, were by and large different in that they were far more consensual, grassroots, and experimental endeavors. They did not seek to achieve a predetermined plan and were often based on egalitarian models of decision-making inspired by the concurrent feminist movement. They were also influenced by the burgeoning environmental movement of the time. Sustainable living would actually emerge as the focus and ideal of the third wave of intentional communities, the eco-village movement, which came and intensified in the 90s. So very few of these and current intentional communities seek to reformulate society as a whole, instead focusing on specific fields of collective life, be these economic, educational, or environmental, or even interpersonal. Auroville stands out in this long history of intentional and utopian community projects for a number of reasons. Started on what was a barren plateau, if you remember the photograph on the first slide, Auroville celebrated its 50th anniversary this year. Now this is significant because 80% of intentional communities do not make it past 2 years. It is the largest intentional community in the world, with 2,700 residents of 55 nationalities, which makes it by far the most culturally diverse. While it may seem small, the size of an average village, it's big for an intentional community. The next biggest one, Damencure in Italy, is less than half the size. And the average size of intentional communities today is about 40 people. Following Surabindo's affirmation that all life is yoga, Auroville has a broad scope of activity, including a wide range of commercial and social enterprise, alternative schooling and environmental restoration, artistic and cultural life. Although it has the size of a village, it has more of the vibrancy of a small city and continues to draw people from around the world who resonate with its applied spiritualism. The breadth and diversity is unique in an intentional community setting, and in undertaking the experiment of creating an autonomous, alternative society, the project of Auroville is thus akin to that of the first wave of utopian communities, albeit practiced in the spirit of the second wave of the 1960s. So let's revisit what it is that we understand about utopia. I'd like you to turn to the person next to you for a moment, or behind you, and tell them your first reaction to the idea of utopia. Is it scary, inspiring, appealing, impossible, foolish? Yeah? So take a couple of, maybe a minute or two and just exchange them.
Either way, I think you were ahead, just like the flowering. You'll become more. You'll eventually
Part of me is still back in 1970. I still remember that. There's a part of me that is still like totally and all the stuff, all the crap stuff that's happening since then doesn't seem to diminish it. It's like a Teflon vision that I have. Nothing. In fact, I've had a hard time seeing, like the second
And I'm going to call your attention back. The conversation about utopia has been going on for thousands and thousands of years, so I understand that was a very short window. So utopia is a word that was coined by Thomas More in 1516 in his book by the same name. A book which I've actually boycotted reading because of how he defined utopia. Utopia, for him, it's a made-up word that means both the good place and no place, implying that utopias are impossible to realize, something which has meant most attempts to try to do so, like Auroville, seem pointless. This is due to the prevailing definition of utopia, which is a perfect, fixed state. These ideal societies have been imagined, to our knowledge, since ancient Greece. The 19th century utopian communities were just the first time when these imagined societies were attempted practically. Often these were accompanied by city plans that would create the settings for such societies to be organized within. The perfectly planned city as the means to realizing ideal society came strongly to the fore in the 1950s, when the mother first began imagining Auroville, the most famous contemporary project being Brasilia. The 1970s is when the idea and practice of utopia came to be radically reformulated as something emergent rather than predetermined. Rather than a fixed, perfect, unattainable state, which raises all the questions of fixed by whom, perfect for whom, and useful for whom, Utopia came to be reimagined as imperfect, dynamic, and to be embodied in the conditions of the present, no matter their limitations. Rather than being about an imagined perfect state, it was about the innate perfectibility of the present. Utopianism was here to serve an evolutionary function. This is consistent with the work of integral yoga, which sought to hasten the evolution of consciousness, and with the mother's vision for Auroville, which she imagined as a laboratory of evolution dedicated to this purpose. The mother had no blueprint for the society that Auroville should become. The community was to develop organically as a divine anarchy in accordance with the progressive spiritualization of its members. And the kind of society that would emerge from this could not be anticipated. She never lived in the community, insisting it should be self-organized and that there should be nothing fixed, no rules, those were her words, so as to allow space for this progressive process. One of the key questions that this conference poses is, whatever happened to pedagogy? So I'd like to offer some insights from the Auroville experience. The Auroville Charter states that it will be the site of an unending education and constant progress, dedicated to the divine will. Over the last 50 years, Auroville has developed collectively and experimentally as a participatory body politic dedicated to conscious evolution. Having the opportunity to do so in an applied way makes it the ultimate learning environment, I would argue, because every endeavor and interaction is a potential site of transformation and reformulation. You might ask, how is this different from life anywhere? Can we not learn from all of our experiences in whatever context? Of course we can. But Auroville provides a context in which the capacity to engage in shaping one's environment is greatly enhanced, and the ability to make each engagement meaningful for our own inner and outer growth is supported by a spiritual framework, understanding, and practice. And some would even say a spiritual field, force field. Thanks to its economic organization, individual personal development is also available to all Aurovillians free of cost, in the form of classes, workshops, and trainings. Free performances, concerts, and art exhibition foster public culture, while such exposure is restricted to elites in the vast majority of modern societies, right? I mean, how much does it cost to go to the San Francisco Ballet? So this integral living environment alone is incredibly rich and formative for children raised in Auroville. And I speak from personal experience here, as well as from the experiences of students of Auroville, other students of Auroville, such as myself, since its inception. These voices have been captured in a comprehensive qualitative survey in which the open, free, caring, connected, and diverse sociocultural context of Auroville and its embodied idealism was repeatedly highlighted as the most formative aspect of our education. Education clearly emerging as synonymous with upbringing. I find this particularly significant in the context not only of rethinking pedagogy, but also for this new understanding of utopianism as emulating in the present the future we wish to create. That said, Auroville is also well known for its pedagogical practices, which arise from the educational philosophy and approach of integral yoga, one that seeks to foster and enrich inner development through the exploration and progressive realization of multifaceted human potential. This wide exposure is complemented by supporting each child in their own naturally emerging focus and process as per the integral education philosophy of free progress. Beyond schooling, work becomes the site for a lifelong learning that is inextricable from the practice of integral yoga. The mother spoke of work in Auroville not as a way to earn one's living, but a way to express oneself and to develop one's capacities and possibilities. In order for Aurovillians to be able to choose work best suited to their own personal growth, it would have to be divorced from the necessity of earning a living, which is why she envisaged that the basic needs of members would be provided for collectively. work was to be undertaken as a spiritual practice so that it may serve not only the evolution of consciousness in individuals, but also catalyze the transformation of the material world it engaged, thus serving the development of the collective. Work then becomes a key site in which Aurovillians practice embodying consciousness, something that is key to the understanding of what it means to be an Aurovillian, because the spiritualization of society depends on both individual and collective transformation. Other sites in which Aurovillians explore conscious embodiment include physical practices such as yoga, tai chi, dance, in addition to meditative, contemplative, and healing practices, as well as art. Now, art has long played a central role in the utopian imaginary, because it offers a free space in which to explore alternatives and challenge present conditions. In Auroville, artistic practice is predominantly one in search of the manifestation of a higher consciousness, as well as embodying unity in diversity, one of Auroville's core ideals, by integrating various cultural traditions in dance, musical, and theatrical performance, and of raising awareness, environmental, for example, in the case of our famous Auroville Trash and Show. So the pursuit of beauty, harmony, and the good life is intrinsic to the utopian imaginary. Auroville was started on a heavily eroded plateau, and environmental regeneration and sustainability was a central endeavor in the early years of the community, and continues to be very important today. Afforestation in particular has been extraordinarily successful, as you can see from this photograph, and has become symbolic of the dedication towards nurturing a healthy, harmonious, and beautiful life and environment. Auroville's built environment, too, seeks to fulfill this utopian promise. The mother had envisaged the setting of the spiritual society as a city, in keeping with the utopian imaginary of the time, and commissioned an architect to design it. The futuristic model is based on a galaxy, its central point the Machimandir, a space of concentrated consciousness referred to as the soul of the city, and emanating from the spiritual core, 4 zones guiding the development of collective life. Importantly, the city plan integrated important green areas interconnecting from periphery to core, which was very progressive at the time. So, again, another central question of this conference, whatever happened to the revolution? So in the Auroville case, the revolutionary spirit of '68 was channeled into the evolutionary project and practice of Ichigo Yoga. My father, who joined Auroville in 1975, counted among the young protesters of the late 60s and 70s, barricading the streets of London. But unlike his friends who were focused on the revolution, he had no doubt it would be won. His burning question was, what are we going to do once we win it? And in Auroville, he found the answer. But it's important to flag here that one of the biggest criticisms of intentional communities is that they draw energy and activism away from change in mainstream society, that they are insular and escapist projects. I would invite us to consider utopian communities as just one of the multiple avenues for the transformation of planetary consciousness. The mother herself specifically stated that Auroville was not the only solution, but hopes to be a center of transformation that can set an example for the world of what is possible. I would also like to highlight that intentional communities have made little known but incredibly significant contributions to the broader societies in which they're embedded, particularly in the field of pedagogy. New Harmony, an intentional community founded by Robert Owen in Indiana in the 20th century, is recognized, or 19th, as the pioneer of free public education and free public libraries, which since became US institutions. Over the last 50 years, Auroville has been a focal point for the pioneer of innovative forms of collective and economic organization, renewable technologies, sustainable architecture, educational practices, and social enterprise, with local, regional, national, and international reach and engagement. It is recognized and endorsed notably by the government of India and UNESCO for just this reason. So, how can the ongoing Auroville experience inform the age-old project of Utopia in 2018? I'd like to offer a few points of contemplation that arise from my research and personal experience. The Auroville experiment is a living example of utopian anarchism, so different from the planned utopias of the past, and considerably more successful in terms of longevity, creativity, and equitability. However, it is not entirely non-prescriptive. It has a framework and ideals determined by a founder. But importantly, Aurovillians have the freedom to experiment with these. This balance of predetermination and emergence, I would suggest, has been vital to the project. The pre-existing ideals have been fueling a powerful and shared devotion and commitment, while the intentional absence of a defined approach to realizing these has fostered a plural environment, bound beyond differences in its orientation to the shared and clearly outlined dream of Auroville. Differences, however, are rife, and past statements made by the founder are often invoked to assert singular pathways over others. Notably, the architectural master plan is the one significant predetermined feature of the Auroville project, even though the architect did state that the city was to evolve responsively in tandem with the progression of the society it would host. And predictably, given the criticisms of the fixed strand of utopianism, the plan and its implementation is a source of significant contention and division within the community, because many Aurovillians feel it is divorced from the realities of the present and hinders rather than facilitates the emergent evolution of society. That said, it falls under the balance of predetermination versus emergence. Having a framework is also very helpful in terms of concentrating our existence and settlement there. The absence of decisive leadership and failure to bridge differences in collective processes thus stall collective development. Yet, this horizontal, self-governing anti-structure, I like to call it rather than structure, is also key to empowering individuals to take initiative in any area of collective life, including ones that are usually restricted to or by, again, elites in most societies. It thus fosters a sort of integral entrepreneurial culture. Unlike the majority of other utopian communities, Auroville has not been based on collectivity over individuality. And herein lies what I believe is another key to its success, certainly in terms of longevity, equitability, and creativity. Despite its designated master plan, Auroville is not a gated community, and it is set in an overwhelmingly deprived geographical site, environmentally, economically, and socially, when considered within the global context. This compels Auroville to engage with progressive transformation in the face of challenges that constitute the experience of the majority of the global population. Something that makes Auroville a far more relevant and rooted utopian experiment than others. Most progressive hubs, for example San Francisco, are significantly buffered from such challenges and constraints. Furthermore, unlike many intentional communities that are quite strongly bounded, Auroville is open to multiple layers of participation from outsiders, be they day tourists to long-term volunteers, thus facilitating a flow of exchange where many such experiments risk stagnating in the face of long-term insularity. Auroville benefits from a unique status within the legal framework of the Indian government, which grants it a level of national protection and respect, where many intentional communities over the course of history have dissolved due to governmental or other pressure from the dominant host society. Some of you may have watched Wild Wild Country and seen the full expression of that. At the same time, Auroville retains autonomy over its internal affairs, enabling it to be self-managing and to experiment with alternative practices. Something that, again, has proven to be really challenging in the absence of a facilitative legal framework. So one example of success is setting up cooperatives as a legal structure to allow for different forms of economic engagement, but these examples are very few, unfortunately. So the Auroville example thus compels us to carefully consider the role of the state in facilitating altered development, even though the two have typically been pitted against one another. Finally, Auroville does not rely on creating the external forms and systems of a new society. Even though it works towards these ardently, their viability relies on an inner work of transforming individual and collective states of consciousness with which these are inspired and inhabited. Thank you for being here and for your attention. This photograph was taken at the 50th anniversary of Auroville earlier this year, in anticipation of it. This is the Auroville symbol made up with a human mentioned. So, we've got some videos for those of you who want to hang out, but first, I'd like to invite Sauro and Bindu from Auroville, who are here as well, to join me and to answer any questions that you might have about Auroville.
So, here, why don't you take seats? Questions?
I think we should clap.
Yeah. Somebody has a mic? Okay.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Too short, but we have time to talk. I'm curious about the intercultural feature of, you mentioned 55 nationalities and half of them, of the people Indian and the rest coming from all over the world. I'm wondering, not only in the practical life, how does that influence the way you work, but also on the consciousness and the principle and the way that the mother thought about the child, envisioning that multicultural environment, all that was possible, to find something which would suit everyone's spiritual and practical needs.
No, go for it.
I have such a long answer to that question. I'll try to take it one step at a time. Maybe I'll work backwards. So you're saying about the mother envisioning, this let's say transnational, maybe community rather than international. And it's important to say that, the mother was envisaging Auroville after the Second World War. So for this reason in particular, we have these records in her writings and her conversations. She was very adamant that we would have to figure out a way to connect, across cultural divides. That was very strong for her, given the historical context in which she was thinking about this. In terms of finding something that would suit everyone, what I think is really one of the strengths of Auroville, and in a way why it's successful, definitely in terms of longevity, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all community. And a lot of communities, a lot of communes, unfortunately, do impose kind of one way of life on everyone. And that might not work for everyone, it might not work for people of different cultures, and it might not even work for me, throughout my life as I change. So I think that's really important to note, that there's not one way of eating, practicing, speaking, engaging, working that everyone is asked to ascribe to. In the absence of that, we just do the best that we can. And it's so many things. It's really beautiful to have so many different cultures bring their gifts and to learn from each other. And there's sometimes really unexpected challenges just through cultural differences. The question that I have though is, so I was born and raised in Auroville, and so while people who come from different cultures have all of that cultural, the only word that comes to mind is baggage, but that's not the right word, I don't mean it in a negative sense, but come with all that, an imprint, right? But those of us who were born and raised there really grew up in an Aurovillian culture that was truly transnational. So yeah, that's what I can share on that.
Excuse me. Sorry. No, I totally, this is probably one thing we'll all agree on, that Aurovilians are famous for not agreeing with each other, and that goes to show exactly how diverse we are in viewpoints. And I think this is extremely important because we have known that, you know, once you've got one mindset, it doesn't work. It kind of collapses. It becomes cultish. So in Auroville, actually, we don't have any collective practices. We never sit together and meditate and anything like that. What unites us is our ideals. All of us completely subscribe to things like the Auroville Charter, to be a true Aurovillian, the Mother's Text, a dream, there should be a place on earth which belongs to no one. Sorry, I got that wrong. There should be a place on earth which nations can claim as their own. And so I'll speak about it on Sunday or more on this, about this, but having ideals allows subjective interpretation. So you have plurality of interpretations of this text. So I really think that somewhere how it is held is very important about how we go to university with human unity towards a plural united vision. The second thing I'd like to offer in this question of international and transnational, I thank you for, she was born and brought up in Auroville, so she can truly speak about the emergent Auroville culture. But I'd like to remind us that even Aurovillians have started using these politically correct words, calling ourselves an international city. The mothers said it's a universal town. And I really thought about that. What's the difference between universal and international? And to me, universal is something back. It's about universal values that we hold. Throughout the concept of nation and nation states and all the problems associated with, what do we all agree upon? And we agree on that core value of peace or something. So that again is the binding glue. It's not international, but it's universal. It's something that we all share. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know whether I'm being very coherent. It's been a long day.
No, I'm taking from Suryamayi about the Auroville culture. Because actually what creates a common texture is that we are developing our own culture, our own system and reference. And for those who are growing up there or are there since a long time, it's become quite a natural fact. Sometimes I may work for a long time with people and I don't even, yes, I'm aware of their nationality, but it totally goes out of my spectrum of my own way of things. Nevertheless, it's a society where we are people from 55 countries, and the number of countries has increased a lot in the last 10, 15 years. And we have our own issue of integration, especially when we go and talk about the language. I would say we are a kind of common culture when we refer to each other, individual relation and working relation, etc. When we talk of collective decision, we are very much limited in a very complete involvement by the fact that English is the main medium of language for the large majority of people, and we have a large section of population which, for which of them English is not their own mother tongue. We have a lot of people from many European countries, or Eastern European countries, or South America, which are living that they don't have the same capacity of expression during a general assembly, during a general meeting. On work is okay for daily work, daily routine, individual interaction, but they are not fully empowered. We have, it has been mentioned that half of the population is Indian, and even here we have a big difference because I would say 80% of the Indian population come from the local village around, which is a very important element that for integration with the surrounding reality. But most of them are coming from a rural background. They don't have the level of language proficiency that you might have from people who are coming from other parts of India, who are coming with a bit of a different background of the location, etc. So we have witnessed different issue of cultural integration, and although it does not appear too much on the day-to-day level of activity, because we always find someone that can intermediate between one culture and another, we have a lot of level of facilitator and intermediator. When we talk in terms of collective decision, collective participation, which are expressed mainly in what is called a resident assembly, that is the body of all adult Aurovillians that are supposed to empower and take the major decision of community life, that the language medium still remain one aspect of difficulties. And that is one fact that we are trying to work a lot. I mean, even on basic level, we are now investing for equipment for simultaneous translation. Also, we have equipment, but we need to train the people who are capable to do this in a common way. We do a lot of emphasis in teaching language and opening language school, etc. So that is as a tool for empowering people and encouraging also diversity of language.
Microphone.
So many people read Adventures in Consciousness and went to Auroville, and so that became the ideal as was written by Sat Prem. So I'm wondering now, with the state of India being the owner of Auroville and really the manager, how those ideals have changed on the ground. And my experience of Auroville was that it didn't run by any system other than a capitalist system. So I'd like somebody to speak to that and possibly make me wrong, if, hopefully.
The state of India is not, we will talk more about more in detail on Sunday about this, but the state of India is not the owner of the Auroville project. Is the custodian, in the sense that he has provided a legal framework out of which a project can develop. I was mentioning before the resident assembly, which is actually, my mother always said that every decision about Auroville has to be taken by the people who are living there and are participating actively in the place. So when there was a need to have an intervention of the state, there was the need to embed this principle in legal language in an act that has been approved by the parliament. And that's how it came, the definition of resident assembly. So it is one document, one act of the parliament that said the resident assembly of Auroville has such a power to decide for themselves. So it has been, the role of the state in this particular case has been a kind of recognizing the need to empower the participant of a particular experiment to take decision and decide by themselves. So in this sense, there is no absolute ownership of the state. Regarding capitalism, I would say that Auroville strive not to have absolutely a change of money within its own internal things, but need, as we will see on Sunday, some means to financially support himself in terms of relation with the state. So that's why we have developed a unique principle of social entrepreneurship, where there is no ownership of capital, there is stewardship of the capital, there is no share of dividend, but the entrepreneurial work is made as part of the contribution to the community, both in terms of providing a know-how, as well in terms of providing means for the financial maintenance of the city and this sort of activity.
If I could just add one clarifying point to what Sarah just said. I would say in technical economic terms, Auroville probably comes closest to a social economy. So like you mentioned, there are businesses, but these businesses are not owned by individuals. They are owned by the community at large, by the Auroville Foundation at large, which means the biggest issue, right, with capitalism is that the profits go to very, very, very few people. They own the power of capital. I mean, that was, the whole kind of Marxist thing was based on, people owning the means of production. So in Auroville, any enterprise is owned by the community at large, and that is a huge difference. And that's the power differential right there. Is it owned by the individual, or is it owned by the community?
Let me just try to clarify that more. I think Auroville is a bit like India. Anything you say about it, there'll be another contradictory statement that's also true about it. So is it a capitalist system? Yes, it is and it isn't. In the sense that even though, as my friends are saying here, that Auroville as a community or entity as Auroville Foundation owns all the businesses, yet there's a lot of individual autonomy that which they run. But it's remarkable that our current guideline is that they give 1/3 of the profits to Auroville, which allows us to run a welfare society where education is free, healthcare is subsidized, and so on. And also I could give you other examples of the shared economy. I'm very often complimented on my outfits. Actually, half of my wardrobe comes from the Auroville free store. I don't pay for my dresses. Or also we have a cooperative store where you walk in, there are no prices on the things. They're not for sale, like if you need tea or rice or something, you don't find a price tag on it. Because the idea is that Auroville should provide for your basic needs. So we all contribute a certain amount of money each month, and from there we collectively take what we need. So in these ways we kind of try to subvert the traditional monetary thing. Just one last thing before, since I have the mic. Sorry, because I've been disagreeing with Suryamayi and Saro, and it is back to your question in the morning. Regarding, has the revolutionary passion in Auroville, have we lost it? In some ways, okay, yes, because, individuals grow and change, communities grow and change. Auroville started out, it was very difficult, as Jack and Mary will tell you. In the early days, it was at a survival level, and now we're at a very affluent level, where it's very easy for people to come and actually retire in Auroville. But I think, as Suryamayi pointed out, Auroville, our experiment was, and it was taken up by quote-unquote hippies like a dad, to take that revolutionary passion and see how we can stabilize it into evolutionary societies. How can we were still trying to build the new world that the revolutionaries went off. And I just would also like to point out, because this is where I would beg to differ with Suryamayi, I don't think we are insular. Auroville Village Action Group works in about 30-40 villages, directly helps about 8,000 women in a very successful microcredit fund scheme, which is studied in India. And similarly with healthcare, we provide basic healthcare and dental care to so many villages around us. We are known for India for our environmental regeneration work, where Aurovillians, the list goes on. We work in waste management. There are people from the fashion industry who actually intervened in Varanasi because the Varanasi silk industry, weavers were dying out because of the corporate handlooms, and to take up. Yeah, so I'm very passionate about all the work that Aurovillians do outside Auroville. So not insular,
No, just to clarify, Bindu, in case anybody misunderstood, I was saying that a common criticism of intentional communities is that they're insular, but that Auroville is not.
Thank you. Maybe I
There was a question, yeah.
What is the entry procedure for Auroville? I'm just wondering, how do you make sure that the right people are coming, or is there any criteria like right people, or anybody can just come in, and then how do you, like, you talk about Wild Wild West, there's like a lot of homeless people then can come in. Yeah.
Yeah, I might even move there.
Well, first of all, we don't make any proselytism. I mean, we provide information that we're there about our project, but we don't try to attract people. That sometimes we are criticized because the level of population is low. Normally, the process of being part of Auroville to become a member of this project is a two-way aspect. I mean, normally, if someone is interested, is encouraged to come and spend some time and see what is the reality. We don't normally encourage people just to close down everything in their life and expatriate and change culture and environment unless they've seen it before. And after at least one first visit of 2-3 months, if people feel that they're really attracted by this project after seeing on the ground, they can approach one particular service that is called entry service, that is aiming to give guidance to the people how to get introduced into the Auroville life. Normally, after an interview, if one gets admitted through this entry service, if it is a foreigner, it takes a special visa that is specific to be a resident in Auroville, and go through a period of normally of 1 year, which is a trial period that can be extended for another year. And normally 1 or 2 years is a period that is enough long for the person to understand whether he really feel that is the path, the place that you want to undertake, or vice versa. I mean, normally what is happening we have very rarely a case of conflict where people wanted to stay and that after the ending of the 1 year period and the entry service didn't want. We have a very limited number of cases. Normally 1 or 2 years of living there, interacting there, is a period that is long enough to understand whether the people fit with the community or the community fit with the person, and so it's a system that is relatively simple, but it's leave room for different exploration. It's difficult to be part of Auroville, apart from the process, for the material condition of living. That Bindo mentioned that is the risk to become a place for retired people is actually there. We will see on Sunday when we talk more about the economy. Our economy is able to support our own living at the moment, but settling, building house requires certain investment and participation from the individual. And that makes very difficult for young people to come and settle there like it was happening in the early 70s. And it's more easy for people who have already made a certain part in their life, with their own professional, their own saving. At some point say, I had enough of this life, I want to go for something else and to do investment for housing. And that is an area anyway that we are trying to work a lot. I mean, we are launching many schemes for housing for young people, even simple accommodation, etc. So, but that is, I would say, the most difficult challenge is the material condition that is there.
I have an answer to, one answer to how do you get the right people there question. When I was there at one time, the advisory board, the International Advisory Board, there's more official word for that. What is
International
Advisory Council was there, and they're sitting on the stage, and there were many, many, many people listening to them, questioning. One very exuberant young man got up and he said, "This is the most wonderful place. You need to tell people. You need to advertise. You need to spread the word. You need to get on." I don't know that social media was in place at that point to the extent it is now. The man just very calmly said, "No, we don't advertise per se in the way you're thinking. How did you find out about it?" And the young man said, "Well, my sister knew somebody who," he said, "that's how." people come.
Can I just say one more thing? Whenever questions of entry come up, I'm always reminded of this. One of the definitions of a cult is they make it very easy for you to join and very difficult to get out. And Auroville is the opposite. They make it terrible for you to try and join, you to face a bureaucracy, and nobody cares if you leave.
I have a question. Actually, it's a two-part question. Firstly, does one have to be a devotee of Mother and Sri Aurobindo to be part of Auroville? And the second part to that question is, there is such a thing as Fundamentalism. To what extent does Auroville participate?
Oh my goodness.
Define a bit more how you see our
Excellent question.
Well, there's many layers to it, or many degrees to it. It can start with just sort of blinkering one's eyes to diversity in terms of religious practice, and just kind of quoting Mother and Sri Aurobindo for everything that one does. And other kind of like higher degree of that is where one actually just sort of uses Sri Aurobindo and the Mother to bludgeon others.
We will have different views. I can start with mine. No, actually there is not such a need to be a devotee of Mother Aurobindo to be part of Auroville, although it's advisable to have an idea of what Aurobindo and Mother said, I mean to have an idea of the concept and the background. Regarding our fundamentalism, I think you should define what you mean for aura. If you mean in the sense of Aurobindo and Mother, or a fundamentalism of Auroville. Because
Mother and Sri Aurobindo.
Because if we say Mother and Sri Aurobindo, yes, there is a tendency on certain people to quote Mother and Sri Aurobindo, but is a tendency which is not so much in favor in Auroville. Although, personally speaking, I would prefer that. I think that a deeper knowledge of Mother and Sri Aurobindo would help Auroville in its growth, also not the knowledge of the quotation taken out of the context. This is a kind of heritage that was there a few years ago, now somehow is not so much supported, also it is happening. But there is a different type of, could be, I made a question which type of our fundamentalism it means, because there is a different type of growing fundamentalism that is not yet there, but it may grow there. Fundamentalism, Auroville-centric, no? Auroville above all, Auroville about certain type of certain frame of social behavior that is prevailing above all. It's not yet there, but it may come. So that is something that one should be aware and alert to.
Briefly, to give a historic perspective of I'm sorry, Devashish, what was your first? We agree on that one. Yeah. That you don't. Yeah. Actually, I think there's a place where the mother says she would like people who join Auroville to know of Aurobindo's and the mother's work, but it's not mandatory. You don't get quizzed. And more importantly, actually, we have a very healthy, secular, agnostic population in Auroville. Also, mostly, the children who are born and brought up there, they have developed their own views, and more importantly, instead of reading the text, they kind of live up to the ideals, or try to imbibe them, actually have a more embodied way, many of them. Last thing on that, also bearing in mind that 40% of our population is not only Tamil, many of them were illiterate. We just absorbed them from the local villages because so many of them simply haven't read any of the texts. So that gives you an idea of the diversity of Auroville. Auroville fundamentalism, yes, thank God it's dying out. I mean, it's religious dogmatism is one of the things that kills spiritual communities. And I think, as Saura says, we also agree with that one. Somehow, nowadays, there's not a whole lot of mother said this, mother said that. I also think it's because, the mother was a very, very charismatic, whoever she was. I take her to be a spiritual leader, but she must have been an extremely charismatic person. I mean, all these crazy Aurovillians, they had one darshan and they were willing to give up all their comforts in the West and go under burning sun and dig wells and, plant trees, carrying water to keep the trees alive, build their own shelter. Auroville had no infrastructure. So naturally, people who were close to the Sri mother's lineage, they naturally had a closer affinity for her teachings. But people who join now 50 years later don't even have a connection to the Sri ashram sometimes. So I think that's there is, and Sora and I are going to disagree with that on this one probably. I feel there is some fundamentalism in a galaxy town plan, because some of us would like a town plan that evolves and is part of goes with the natural landscape, and some of us see it as given and imposed. We can speak more about it. We don't disagree with that. Great, thank you.
I'm just going to pick up, Bindu, on something that you said around the generational difference, right? Around how the generational difference around how people relate to Sri Bindu and the mother. And like Bindu said, in my experience, and also what came up in this survey that I quoted earlier and that I analyzed, for the people who grew up in Auroville, their connection with the texts is very much something embodied. And I think that comes back to what we were talking about earlier with the culture, and with Auroville, sort of growing its own culture, because at the beginning, in order to start to develop that culture, you're very much relying on knowledge of Mother and Sri Bindu, or direct experience of Mother, or of the text, and really understanding mentally, as well as psychically, that philosophy in order to then create that culture intentionally, and to create that, the society. And now that it's been there's a culture that's there, and I know because I've experienced it. Because growing up, I wasn't reading Mother and Sri Bindu, I'm talking about child, I've read them now. And yet when I came to read them much later, my teen years or even my early 20s, I was like, oh, these concepts, it's so familiar, that's exactly where I live or what I understand, but it had come through a pedagogical process of just transmission rather than teaching. And I think that what I found quite interesting is that a lot of young people in Auroville do have a sense of respect and connection to Mother and Sri Bindu, but I would say that the way that they are devoted to them, this conception of a devotee, is something that is changing across generations in terms of how people are devotees, is an evolving concept.
Would you say there's anything different from, let's say, Hare Krishna followers in the Hare Krishna community?
I don't know, I don't know enough about that
I'm
community.
not able to.
I saw, yeah.
You don't think so?
So I have a couple of related questions, I guess. Maybe I missed it, and for which I apologise, but can you quickly say what the composition is of Auroville? How many people are there? What's the kind of composition in terms of Westerners versus natives, and sort of gender and age? But that's just a kind of information curiosity. I guess my questions are more related to the ideas or the politics behind Auroville, beyond the kind of the holy text, if you like, of the mother, and also how that relates or not to, I think, one of the tensions you mentioned in your talk about being an intentional community and how that relates or not to the outside world. Is it an insular purely for the benefit of those that live there, and particularly, as you're saying, if it's actually difficult to get in there, and or is there also a part of do you perceive yourselves as being an example of a better way to live which could be emulated or put into practice by others irrespective of whether or not they're actually in Auroville. So is there a kind of outreach proponent to your intentional community?
So I'm just going to answer these really briefly because they were raised in the presentation and talk, and right? I mean, I think we raised them earlier. So I'm just going to say really briefly to you, it is 2,700 people. There's 55 different nationalities, and 50% are Indian. The gender balance, to my knowledge, is pretty equal. And I'm not sure where we're at right now in terms of young people to old people.
I would say we have 800 people below 20-year age. And then we have a certain, the demographic pyramid of Auroville has a certain shrinkage between 25 and 40, for the problem was mentioned before. So we have a fairly large population base below 20, and then it's restricted in the area between 25 to 35, 40, and then again it widened from 40 to 80. We have also quite a section of population beyond 70, relatively large, so more similar to the European Western society than Indian society, and that's why we have also a lot of many projects in this direction. And one important element, when we say 50% Indian, that we have to qualify that we have local population and population from other parts of India. 80% of the Indian population come from the surrounding villages, so that is a very important element. And they have, to some extent, their own problem of integration, being coming from a rural environment, most cases illiterate or with the low level of education, as Bindo was mentioning, where to integrate also with urban India from other parts of India with high level of education and level of sophistication. Even within the foreigner, it's quite different reality. There are some nations which are very strongly represented, like France, Germany, Italy, Holland, UK, Spain. Eastern Europe is very largely represented. Asian countries are mainly represented, apart from India, by a large number of Korean people. And only recently we have having a presence from other Asian countries like Japan or Kazakhstan, Central Asia in a more minor way. So it's, and we have a lot of presence also from South America. So basically, but many countries from Asia and Africa are still not, Middle East are still not fairly represented in Auroville.
Then to your question about political practice and political ideals, that's going to be the subject of the talk on Sunday morning. That's where we're going to focus in on that, but we can chat about it later if you like. And then we've agreed that the insularity versus outreach, Auroville does do an enormous amount of outreach, so I definitely wouldn't say that it's insular. There was someone had a question here earlier.
I just have a quick I wasn't quite clear of what you're saying about idea politics, but building on what Sauro is saying about the representation in Auroville for a city of human unity, what you have to realize is that we still live in a world of inequalities. You know, Auroville, the foreign population of Auroville is largely Europeans and actually, surprisingly, the Americans actually, many of them left. That was just a side joke. But, I'm sorry, to come back to my point, you know, many countries in Asia and Africa, people don't have the privilege of even getting a passport. Forget even having the means to take an airfare and come and live in Auroville. So if you put that in context, of the socio-political context. About your last question, do we try to, the way I heard it was, do we try to sell ourselves? And actually the idea is no, we do a lousy job of selling ourselves, I was recently told. We don't see ourselves as trying to give ready-made solutions to the world. And I think Auroville works best as, maybe this is what Suryamayi was touching upon, Auroville works best as a place for individual spiritual practice. We give you the freedom, take responsibility, and you can move with that. And some people don't have the discipline to develop and move. And so it's not that every Aurovillian is a very conscious and moving being, and some people are there. Yeah, it really depends within you how you put it. Maybe these are not the answers you were requesting, but this is what came
No, I'm
up in
just
my
quite
mind.
curious because you had defined yourself earlier in the day as an activist, and then you also used the term deliberately anarchy as part of your talk.
Right.
So again, you're actually using explicitly political terms to
Right.
describe your work. So I'm just curious as to.
Yeah, right. So just to give you why I call myself an activist is because Aurovillians don't work just within Auroville. We also can work outside. Yeah. So that's how I sometimes do a bit of activism work.
Some of them in America.
Some of them in America. A few.
That's a little side joke.
Saro had mentioned, you said you were getting a lot of retirees. Did I hear that wrong? Or, I mean, what happens when people sort of age out of working and you are supposed to be participating? I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yes, as I was saying, we are developing quite a few projects for senior people and senior citizens, like having assisted housing where they are taken care. We have a project which is meant for people who are that can be also, it's not like hospitium, but people are there but living around in a context where other social activities are happening, like cultural activity, etc. So that old age is not lived as a segregation. When I mean we receive a lot of retired people, I mean people also who are in the 40 or 50 that just leave a job and decided that they were saving investment and they want to settle there. Of course, we are trying to developing. We have an internal caring system for everyone that is a member of Auroville in terms of health service, which provided a very basic limited service, but is there. And we have a system of self-supporting and maintenance. And for people who has dedicated their life to Auroville, and they don't have other means of livelihood because of their own country, they don't have pension or whichever, they still may get supported from the maintenance or recognition of the service, which is done throughout the year. So that means that part of caring is there when people is not anymore in the condition to work or providing an opportunity. And we have also this challenge because somehow we have to contribute to Auroville material or spiritual. So we have a lot of intangible element to consider in our economy. So it's not that there are some people who is supported even if they don't do any, not many, a very limited number, even if they don't do a very particular job, but recognize it that they are doing a certain level of intangible contribution in many other activity of life. So there is not a structure, there is a kind of welfare system, but it's not rigid a structure. It's going to a way to have to be customized and meet the individual requirement, the individual need, and try to deal with the situation when it arises. And then we have a lot of time and appeal to solidarity. People has a certain particular need of health, or certain elder people need a particular care, so we try to have a system of solidarity. And we have also a service that we call health service for giving health assistance at home, both for people who are in particular need or elder people who are not anymore totally self-sufficient. So we try our best. We are not optimal level, but we try our best in this.
You're not allowed to ask questions, Mary?
I'm not, I'm making a comment. No, I just was saying, I know many friends of ours that we have known since we were there at the beginning, who are, I mean, older than I am, still working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There is no retirement age. You work until you can't. So, and I also know people who have come from,
later in their lives who then find very meaningful ways of contributing to the community. So it works kind of both ways.
Okay, last
question. Going back to Utopia, I've taken several groups of students from the University of Washington to Auroville, and they know that it is an intentional, international, utopian community, and these college students zero right in on the utopian part. And I try to dissuade them from what I'm sensing is their image of utopia where everything's perfect. We've had people from Auroville come and help out with their orientation. Shankar, principal of one of the schools, has come to help them orient to the culture and answer questions, teach them a little Tamil. So we tried to dissuade them of that, hoping that they won't go and assume that this is a perfect place. And yet, they do, some of them, do become disappointed when they find it isn't in their picture. That then they'd say to me, I just heard an argument. or I see something that just doesn't work at all. And they don't seem to understand, blah, blah, blah. And it just, they have such a high picture of what that word is carrying that it's tough for them. It takes the whole 3 months for them to come to see that emergent utopia is what it is. And yes, and that was all the fact that there are, in fact, struggles and headbutting and conflicts in Auroville is part of Mother's plan. That's how it's supposed to be, and we need to work through those things. But I wondered, so I dealt with them on the student level, but I wondered if people coming to Auroville, even newcomers, even folks who have committed to be there, still are grappling with an earlier idea of that term and what you've encountered in that.
If newcomers grapple with the term of a perfect society or a perfect, I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't spend a whole lot of my time with newcomers, actually, to be honest.
I spent some time, and most of the kids are very well aware of what they go through. I mean, as I said before, one has to come at least spend some time before admitting to be a newcomer, and the fact that there are contradiction, conflict, difference, it's enough to stay in Auroville one day to realize it. So that people that join Auroville, they are very aware of the challenge that living in a society with such a diversity and an attempt to build not a city but a society, which involves a lot of intangible element. So it involves a lot of struggle and a lot of suffering. So normally people is aware. It does not come as a surprise 1 year later.
I think to end, just by bringing it back to a more broader.
Yeah, if I could have a quick word. I just wanted to go slightly on a tangent to what Jean was sharing about the disappointment of American students going there and saying, oh my gosh, this is it's far from perfect. And one of the criticisms that one often hears, a very valid criticism, is that Auroville has been actually built with cheap local labor. And people actually, because these are villagers who come and work in Auroville, they work as housemaids, they work as gardeners, so you sometimes feel a strong disconnect. You see white men and women and children, and also indigenous local peoples. But then I put back the question to them and I say, you know what, the whole world is built that way. It's just that you don't see it. Like, so much of what we consume is actually, built by poor people in third world countries. So Auroville is actually, in many, many ways, it's a microcosm of the world. All the problems of the world are right there in Auroville. And the mother actually says that in all the texts. She has a beautiful thing about saying, India has become the symbol of all the difficulties of the first world and the third world. And he hopes that Auroville is a place where the solutions will problem. We don't have the solutions. Our strength is we have persevered and will continue to persevere, I hope, for many years.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jean, in response to you, and sort of to bring it back to a broader scale to close here, is that disappointment, I think, is fundamental to all of the social movements that we've heard about today, right? I mean, that's so much of the fuel is actually that disappointment. So I would say that, kind of hope and disappointment, or idealism and disappointment, are kind of two sides of the same coin that is that actual process, right, of evolving and getting better.